If one day you sat down in seat 2A, the first-class seat on a SkyLumen flight, and someone told you to get up because someone else deserves it more, what would you do? Get angry? Argue back, or stay silent and watch them take away what you rightfully paid for? That morning, on the SkyLumen flight, Ethan Brooks, a black man in a simple gray suit, presented his elite member card with a calm smile. But that smile couldn't protect him from the suspicious eyes of Mia Cartwright, the first-class flight attendant, nor from the arrogance of Victoria Sterling, a white regular passenger who always believed seat 2A belonged to her. A folded bill quietly changed hands. A bad decision was made. And, just 5 minutes later, the entire power system that seemed unshakable collapsed. If it were you, when justice and dignity were tested before a silent crowd, would you choose anger, or would you stay silent and let the truth speak for itself? Join me as we witness a story black CEO removed from VIP seat for a white passenger 5 minutes later. The entire staff is fired, a silent symphony of justice and human dignity. If you believe fairness doesn't need to shout to be heard, hit like, share, and subscribe, and let's step into this story together. The SkyLumen Airlines Boeing was preparing to close its doors. Outside, the morning sun glinted coldly against the polished glass. Inside first class, everything was still pale leather seats, champagne glasses tilting gently in passengers' hands, the soft hum of elegant background music. No one spoke loudly. Here, people communicated through polite smiles and quiet glances. In seat 2A sat a black man in his early 40s, crisp white shirt, light gray suit, a simple yet refined watch on his wrist. His name was Ethan Brooks, CEO of Aurora Nexus, a tech company recently invited to form a strategic partnership with the very same airline. He had chosen the window seat, his laptop neatly placed on the tray table, his calm gaze following the runway outside. No one in the cabin knew who he was, and he didn't need them to. Then, the cabin door opened. A soft, yet authoritative female voice spoke. "Excuse me, sir, but seat 2A today has been reserved for a special VIP guest. I hope you'll understand." The speaker was Mia Cartwright, the chief flight attendant for first class. Her smile was perfectly rehearsed, but her eyes carried an order. Behind her stood Victoria Sterling, a white woman in her 50s, elegant, clutching a beige Hermes bag, oversized sunglasses covering half her face. She lifted a brow, as if what was happening was simply natural. Ethan looked up. The light from the door reflected across his calm, dark eyes. "I believe there's been a mistake," he said, voice soft but steady. "My ticket clearly says seat 2A. He held out his boarding pass and his SkyLumen Elite Black Card, the highest tier membership, a status symbol among the airline's most exclusive travelers. Mia glanced at the card, frowned slightly, then smiled politely, but coldly. "I understand, sir, but Mrs. Sterling is one of our regulars. She always sits here. I'm sure you can understand." A pause. A man behind him lowered his newspaper. A middle-aged woman looked over, eyes curious. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin, soft as wind brushing through grass. Ethan remained seated. No reaction, no argument, no raised voice. He simply looked at the attendant as if wondering whether this was real or some kind of test. "You're saying this seat always belongs to her?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Mia replied. "Even though I paid for it, checked in properly, and hold the highest tier membership." Mia hesitated. "We're just following company policy." "Sir," from behind, Victoria Sterling spoke, her tone casual, dripping with the comfort of privilege. "It's all right. Mia, a gentleman surely understands. This seat has always been mine." The words were soft, but they fell heavy, like a drop that finally tips the glass. Several passengers exchanged glances. A younger man discreetly lifted his phone, camera on. No one intervened, but everyone knew something was wrong. Ethan looked down at his ticket, then back at the woman. He smiled faintly, not bitter, not sarcastic. "Fairness doesn't always need proof," he murmured to himself, "but it always finds a way back." Mia misunderstood. She thought it was surrender. She tilted her head, lowering her voice. "If you could please move to another seat, sir, we'll be happy to offer you complimentary drinks, a fake apology, an insult wrapped in politeness." Ethan set his ticket on the table, his calm gaze unwavering. "I don't need compensation. I just want to keep my seat. You know what's rightfully mine doesn't need permission." Mia inhaled sharply, turned away, and spoke into her headset. First-class passenger refusing to comply, and that was the spark. The air shifted colder, heavier. Some passengers turned away, pretending to read. A few shook their heads, caught in discomfort. Across the aisle, Olivia Park, an Asian passenger, quietly lowered her phone and began recording. She didn't know who the man was, but something told her the truth needed to be seen. Outside, the engines roared to life. Inside, the cabin felt suffocating. Ethan sat still, hands clasped, eyes gazing through the window where sunlight gleamed off another plane preparing for takeoff. He could have fought back. He could have demanded justice, even sued. But instead, he chose one thing: control. Because he knew in this world, a black man's anger could be mistaken for a threat. But calmness, true composure, could be the most powerful weapon of all. Mia returned, tension written on her face. From the back, murmurs spread. "He really has the elite card. Maybe they made a mistake." "No, I saw her take the money," someone muttered. "If it were me, I'd be standing up and shouting already." But Ethan didn't shout. He simply adjusted his collar, closed his laptop, and looked toward the approaching supervisor, Logan Whitaker, the man about to make the storm explode. Amid the whispers, Olivia's camera kept rolling, that small blinking red light capturing evidence, capturing the quiet birth of justice, and in that silence, as every eye turned toward seat 2A, only one person seemed to understand. Sometimes, the way we respond to humiliation becomes the truest declaration of our dignity. What they didn't know was that this quiet moment the man asked to give up his seat in silence would spark a quake that would shake SkyLumen to its core. Because just a few minutes later, when the truth came to light, it wouldn't be Ethan leaving his seat. It would be an entire power structure forced to step down. The atmosphere in the SkyLumen Airlines' first-class cabin had changed. That elegant silence, the kind money buys, had thinned into tension, fragile as a single strand of silk. One wrong word, and it would snap. Mia Cartwright, the chief flight attendant, stood by seat 2A, headset in hand, her smile still carrying that standard service polish. Behind her, Victoria Sterling crossed her arms, her nose slightly raised, eyes flicking over Ethan as if inspecting an item, not a human being. "I really don't want to cause trouble," Victoria said, her tone sweet but laced with disdain. "But I always sit here. Always." Ethan said nothing. His silence irritated her. People accustomed to power rarely tolerate it when others don't play their game. Mia leaned in. whispering carefully. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm handling it. Please give me a moment." But time here wasn't meant for fairness. It was the quiet window where power rearranges itself. Victoria bent slightly toward Mia, her voice sharp beneath its softness. "You know, I don't like waiting. We've worked together many times, haven't we?" A pause, and then, in one smooth motion, Victoria reached into her handbag. A small, folded bill appeared between her manicured fingers, rolled neatly, discreetly. The movement was subtle, but Ethan saw it. The way that bill slid into the side pocket of Mia's uniform, as naturally as if it had happened before. No one spoke, no one looked directly, but the truth had passed between them undeniable, wordless, heavy. Mia froze for half a second. Her cheeks flushed, then cooled, professionalism snapping back like armor. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling. I understand," she murmured, her voice blending into the hum of the engines spooling up. The entire exchange lasted only seconds, but it was enough to divide the cabin in two. Those who knew and stayed silent, and the one who knew but didn't need to speak. Ethan remained still. His hands rested on the table, eyes gazing out the window. Not a muscle in his face moved yet behind that calm exterior. He was recording every detail through memory, through quiet observation, through a kind of awareness that made others uneasy. Victoria smiled faintly and stepped closer, her hand resting on the back of seat 2A as if claiming it. "Thank you, Mia. You always understand me." To an outsider, it sounded polite, but underneath it was a declaration of dominance. Seat 2A was no longer just a seat. It had become a symbol of hierarchy, of privilege bought and reaffirmed by a folded bill. Across the aisle, Olivia Park, the young Asian woman, quietly kept her phone recording. She wasn't sure if the footage would matter, but instinct told her this wasn't about a seat. It was about how the world decides who belongs, who's doubted, and who's forced to stay polite while being humiliated. From the overhead speakers, the captain's deep, steady voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We'll be departing in just a few minutes." Ethan inhaled slowly. He looked toward Victoria, now comfortably seated in his seat, a self-satisfied smile on her face. Mia avoided his eyes, pretending to check the passenger list. The cabin was silent again, save for the distant roar of the engines. But the real noise, the one that mattered, lived inside everyone's head. The uneasy realization that something wrong had just happened, and no one would say a word. A man in the back muttered, "Guess he's not used to our kind of service." Another whispered back, "Come on, that seat's always for our regulars. He doesn't look like first-class material anyway." Ethan heard it all. But he didn't flinch, because anger, he knew, is often the gift people want you to give so they can label you the problem. He wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, he picked up his phone, opened the camera, and set it quietly on the tray. Not as a threat, but as a mirror. The tiny red light blinked on. In that instant, Mia stepped back, pretending to recheck her seating chart. She knew deep down that what she'd just done could cost her everything if it ever came to light. But the fear of power sometimes is stronger than the fear of consequence. Ethan didn't need to say a word. He simply looked at the seat that once belonged to him, now occupied, and smiled, a quiet, unreadable smile. Maybe, in that moment, he already knew truth doesn't need a voice to exist. It only needs a moment to be seen. As for Victoria Sterling, she buckled her seatbelt, poured herself a glass of champagne, and smiled, believing the matter was over, that a few bills could, as always, make the world bow. What she didn't know was that the camera had caught everything, every glance, every movement, and the man she thought she'd pushed aside was the very person SkyLumen Airlines would soon have to kneel and apologize to. Outside the window, the sky opened wide. Inside, a story about prejudice and power had just taken off not by engine, but by the quiet, deliberate force of truth. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, it seemed like the incident had ended in silence. But prejudice, once allowed to live, always finds a way to grow. And this time, it wouldn't stop at one seat. It would challenge the entire system that had forgotten what fairness truly means. The service cart wheels bumped softly against the cabin wall, breaking the fragile stillness with a sharp metallic thud. From the rear of first class, Mia Cartwright stepped aside, lowering her head as a man in a black uniform strode forward, his posture that of someone used to commanding, not serving. Logan Whitaker, the cabin supervisor, had arrived. Square jaw, narrow eyes, a voice roughened by cigarettes. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. His glance already carried judgment, and he'd clearly decided who was right. "What's going on here?" "Mia." His tone wasn't one of inquiry. It was a warning. Mia's voice came out small. "This passenger refuses to change seats, even though 2A is reserved for our VIP guest." Logan nodded as if that alone explained everything. He turned to Ethan Brooks, not bothering to check the boarding pass or listen to an explanation. "Sir, I need your cooperation," he said coldly. "We can do this the easy way, or the hard way." The words hung in the air like a knife. Ethan looked up, the cabin lights glinting off his glasses. He wasn't shaken, nor angry. His tone was calm, deliberate, commanding attention without volume. "Could you clarify what exactly you mean by easy and hard?" Logan's mouth curled into a smirk, half amusement, half contempt. "Easy means you stand up, move seats, and let us continue this flight. Hard means I call security onto the plane. I'm sure you don't want that to happen." The sentence landed like a hammer in the already tense air. A few passengers lifted their phones, pretending to check messages, but their cameras were rolling. From the opposite side, Olivia Park had been filming since the beginning. The small red light blinked, reflecting in Ethan's calm eyes. He studied Logan for a long moment, then slowly placed his boarding pass and SkyLumen Elite Black card on the tray. "I have a valid ticket. I have the highest membership tier. I followed every rule. And you're telling me to leave my seat because someone is more familiar than I am. Is that your airline's new policy?" Logan frowned. He wasn't used to this kind of resistance, quiet, logical, unflinching. "We're trying to avoid a disturbance, sir." "A disturbance," Ethan repeated, almost smiling. "I'm sitting quietly. You're the one threatening to remove me because someone likes this seat. Are you sure you understand what the word disturbance means?" The cabin thickened with silence. From seat 2A, Victoria Sterling, now lounging where Ethan should be, interjected sharply. "Oh, for heaven's sake, I don't understand why he's making such a big deal. It's just a seat." Her words made a few passengers glance over. Olivia sighed softly, whispering to herself, "Just a seat. But sometimes it's through one seat that people show who they really are." Logan turned back to Ethan, lowering his voice but not the pressure. "This is my final warning. Sir, if you refuse to move, I'll have to call security. Do you want to delay this entire flight? Ethan's eyes swept the cabin. Curious stares, pitying looks, a few condescending smirks. He knew what they saw, a black man in a confrontation the Royal Society was too comfortable assigning. He drew a slow breath. I won't give up my seat because I haven't done anything wrong. Logan stiffened, voice dropping to a growl. You're making people uncomfortable. Ethan met his eyes, unwavering. No, I'm just making people see. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel heavy, humming with tension. Someone's heartbeat could almost be heard. Mia glanced around nervously, whispering, Logan, a lot of people are recording. Let them, Logan snapped, eyes locked on Ethan. Good. Let them see how this airline handles uncooperative passengers. And that was the breaking point. A voice from the back cut through the quiet. He's got the elite card, I saw it. You're in the wrong. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin, faint at first, then stronger, like a growing tide. Olivia's camera stayed steady, capturing every breath, every stare. Ethan tilted his head slightly, voice calm, almost gentle. Are you sure you want to keep going down this road? Supervisor Whitaker Logan frowned. Are you threatening me? No, Ethan replied softly. I'm asking if you'd rather let justice speak for you. For the first time. Logan hesitated. Then he barked to Mia, call the captain. I want this resolved before we take off. Mia hurried off, her steps quick, nearly running. Ethan stayed seated, hands folded together still, composed. But his calmness now dominated the space, his silence louder than any voice. Whispers spread among the passengers. He's so calm, maybe because he knows he's right. The cabin felt like a stage now where those in power performed their authority, and the one they tried to shame waited quietly for the curtain to fall. But beneath that silence, justice was already rewriting the script. Olivia lowered her phone, watching the man in seat 2A, or rather, the man who should have been in seat 2A. She whispered to herself, if I were him, I don't think I could stay this calm. Ethan didn't hear her, but maybe, deep down, he thought the same. He'd lived long enough to know anger never breaks prejudice, but intelligence can. And as the captain stepped into the cabin, the final link in that chain of unquestioned authority, no one yet realized that in just a few minutes, the entire hierarchy they trusted so completely was about to collapse under its own weight. Heavy footsteps echoed across the cabin floor, slicing through the thick silence. From the end of the aisle, Captain Thomas Reeves, the commanding pilot of the flight, approached. His uniform was crisp, gold-striped epaulets gleaming under the cabin lights, the unmistakable symbol of authority in this sealed world of steel and sky. Every head turned toward him. No one spoke, but everyone knew when the captain himself steps out, things have already gone too far. Logan Whitaker straightened his collar, voice louder than usual, performing for power. Captain, this passenger refuses to cooperate. We've asked multiple times, but he still won't give up the seat. Reeves nodded once, his eyes flicking toward Ethan Brooks, who sat calmly in his seat. Hands folded, expression unreadable. There was no defiance in his posture, but somehow, his stillness demanded more attention than any outburst could. The captain took a step closer. His voice was low, firm, perfectly measured, the voice of someone used to commanding an aircraft and everyone in it. Sir, I'm Captain Reeves. Once I give an order, passengers are expected to comply for safety reasons. I trust you understand." Ethan lifted his gaze. The overhead light reflected in his eyes, bright, steady, fearless. "Captain," he began slowly, "I understand and respect your authority, but I'd like to hear the reason why I'm being asked to leave a seat I booked, paid for, and was verified for." Reeves hesitated. He wasn't used to being questioned. "There was a system mix-up," he said, glancing briefly at Logan, "and this passenger, Mrs. Victoria Sterling," Logan cut in, "is one of our VIP clients. She always sits there." Reeves nodded, as if that explained everything. "Then I hope you'll understand. Mr. Brooks, sometimes flexibility is necessary to keep the flight running smoothly." Ethan looked at the three of them Reeves, Logan, and Mia standing in a neat line before him, 3 uniforms representing order and discipline. And there he was, a man in a plain gray suit, sitting calmly, yet in that stillness lay something powerful, something like a mirror reflecting hypocrisy back at them. "So," he said softly, "I'm being asked to move, not because I'm wrong, but because someone else is more important." "I see." Logan chuckled. "Dismissive. Call it what you want. Now, are you getting up or not?" Ethan didn't answer. He quietly unlocked his phone. A soft click sounded and lifted the camera. The screen showed all 3 of them standing before him. Reeves froze. "What do you think you're doing?" "Just recording the incident," Ethan said evenly, "to avoid any misunderstandings later." Logan stepped forward, his voice sharp and cracking with anger. "You can't record inside the cabin. Hand it over." He reached for the phone, but Ethan's wrist turned smoothly. Out of reach, the movement so calm it looked choreographed. "Don't do that. Mr. Whitaker, you're only making it worse." The words were quiet, yet they hit like steel on stone. The cabin fell utterly silent. Only the steady drone of the engines filled the void, like a distant drumbeat. Several passengers raised their phones higher now. From her seat across the aisle, Olivia Park no longer hid her camera. She held it openly. Lens trained on the confrontation. Mia saw it. Her face went pale. "Captain, they're recording. Several people are—" Reeves frowned. Scanning the cabin, half the passengers were filming now. This was no longer about a seat. It was about justice, and it was being broadcast in real time. Logan lowered his tone, his fury contained only by fear. "Sir, you are seriously disrupting this flight. If you don't move, I'll have to call airport security." Ethan's voice stayed calm, steady. "I'm not disrupting anything. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. And if you want to call security, let them see the video and decide who's really causing the problem." A long silence followed, stretched tight as a wire about to snap. Reeves looked at Logan. Logan looked at Mia. No one spoke, but each of them knew the truth. Every move, every word, every glance was being recorded, and one misstep could cost them far more than this flight. From seat 2A, Victoria Sterling let out a brittle laugh, trying to ease the tension. "Oh, for goodness sake, why make such a big deal? It's just a misunderstanding." Ethan turned to her, a calm, almost weightless look that silenced her instantly. "You're right. Just a misunderstanding. And maybe it's these small misunderstandings that make the world so unfair." No one dared speak after that. Even the hum of the engine seemed quieter. The air was thick, so thick it could be sliced in half. Logan stepped back. Mia avoided Ethan's gaze. Reeves adjusted his hat, exhaling slowly. Even with all his authority, he could feel it, the uneasy awareness of standing on the wrong side of justice. Ethan set his phone gently on the table, its screen still glowing. He didn't say another word, only looked out the window, where golden noon sunlight glimmered across the glass, brushing his calm face. From the back row, Olivia whispered to the passenger beside her, "I think they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." But no one could have guessed just minutes after Ethan was escorted off the plane. That same silence would spread far beyond first class to social media, to boardrooms, and into the very heart of SkyLumen Airlines. Because sometimes all it takes is one video to expose an entire system. The intercom crackled to life, cold, mechanical, detached, due to a minor technical issue. Our takeoff will be delayed for a few minutes. Please remain calm. But everyone knew there was no technical issue, only a human one. The air in first class hung heavy, like fog. All eyes fixed on row 2A, where Ethan Brooks still sat in silence, while three uniforms, Captain Thomas Reeves, Logan Whitaker, and Mia Cartwright, stood before him like a wall of authority. From the back of the plane, two airport security officers stepped in, black uniforms, polished boots, bright airport security badges catching the cabin light. One of them spoke in a flat and practiced tone, "Sir, we've been asked to assist. You need to leave the aircraft immediately." Ethan looked up, meeting their eyes. No fear, no resistance, only a quiet, human exhaustion. He nodded once. "And the reason?" The officer replied, voice robotic, emotionless. "You're being accused of causing a disturbance and disrupting the flight." A wave of whispers rippled through the cabin. Disturbance, the word echoed in the silence like a bad joke. A middle-aged man leaned toward his wife and murmured, "He didn't do anything? I've been watching the whole time." She shook her head softly. "He's a black man. Sometimes that's all it takes." Ethan stood up, not quickly, not slowly, just deliberately. He adjusted his collar, buttoned his vest, then turned to the captain. "I'll leave the plane. Captain Reeves, but you and I both know I wasn't the one causing trouble." Reeves avoided his gaze, replying quietly, "It's protocol, sir." Ethan smiled faintly, a smile that no longer needed words. Protocol, the shield of those afraid to take responsibility. He picked up his small bag and turned toward the aisle. Olivia Park's camera followed him, unblinking. Through her lens, every movement was slow, deliberate, like a man walking through a scene life had prepared for him where the innocent stay silent and the guilty believe they've won. Behind him, Victoria Sterling raised an eyebrow and exhaled in triumph. "Thank you, Mia. Finally, that's taken care of." Mia said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured champagne for the woman. As Ethan walked past the rows of seats, some passengers looked away. Some followed him with pity. Others sighed or muttered under their breath. He just made things complicated, slowed everyone down. Ethan didn't respond. He simply paused for a heartbeat at the cabin door and turned back. His eyes swept across the silent faces, the faces of those who had chosen safety over conscience. "I hope," he said softly, "that next time you witness something wrong, you won't stay as silent as you did today." The words fell like a whisper, yet they carried the weight of a verdict. Ethan stepped forward. The two officers followed behind. The door closed with a dry click, sealing not just the cabin, but perhaps the humanity left inside it. A moment later, Victoria's voice broke the silence, smug and satisfied. Finally, some peace. Some people should really learn to know their place. No one answered. Across the aisle, Olivia whispered quietly, and some people should learn that power can't buy respect. The plane fell silent again. Mia avoided everyone's eyes, pretending to tidy papers. Logan crossed his arms, reclining as if victorious. Captain Reeves returned to the cockpit, but inside, he knew what they'd done wasn't maintaining order, it was betraying decency. Outside, the airport corridor stretched long and sterile. Ethan walked between the two officers, his footsteps echoing evenly against the polished floor. The overhead light shone cold and white, sterile as steel, yet his face remained calm. No anger, no resentment, only clarity. One of the officers spoke softly. "I'm sorry, I'm just following orders." Ethan stopped, met his eyes, and nodded. "You don't need to apologize. Just remember this when justice is replaced by orders. Eventually, the whole system will pay the price." The officer lowered his head. In that small gesture, shame flickered quiet, but real. Back in first class, the door stayed closed. Victoria Sterling reclined, sipping her champagne in smug contentment, but dozens of phones across the cabin were still quietly recording. Those videos in just a few hours would ignite across social media. For now, though, the cabin remained silent. No one realized that the victory they were celebrating was actually the beginning of SkyLumen Airlines' downfall. A man had been forced off a plane in silence. But the truth was, he hadn't really left. He'd simply stepped aside so that justice could step in. And just hours after that plane finally took off, the world began to shake. A 3-minute video hit the internet, capturing everything: the bribe, the confrontation, and the moment Ethan was escorted out. This time, no one would be allowed to stay silent. The airport lounge that afternoon was quieter than usual. Cold white light spilled from the ceiling, glinting off the polished stone floor, stretching human shadows into fading streaks. Ethan Brooks sat alone in a far corner, back against the chair, a paper cup of cold coffee resting in his hand. His suit was still crisp, though a faint wrinkle near his cuff betrayed the aftermath of the confrontation in first class. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter. He was simply still, like a man who had survived many storms and learned that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes in silence. A soft voice came from behind him. "Mr. Brooks." He turned. It was Olivia Park, the Asian woman who had sat across from him on the flight. She held her phone tightly, her expression trembling between nervousness and resolve. "I'm sorry," she said. "I recorded without asking. But I thought you might need this." She placed her phone on the table and pressed play. The screen lit up. The first image, Mia Cartwright walking toward seat 2A, her tone sweet but firm, asking Ethan to move. Then Victoria Sterling, slipping her hand into her purse, pulling out a folded bill and discreetly sliding it into Mia's jacket pocket. The camera caught it all, every movement, every look. Olivia's camera work was steady, unbroken, no cuts, no zooms, just the eye of a silent witness watching justice being bent. Then came Logan Whitaker, stepping in with his cigarette-rough voice, easy way or the hard way. And finally, Captain Thomas Reeves, appearing in full authority, followed by the moment Ethan turned on his own camera. the tiny red light reflecting in their eyes. Everything captured, completely. When the video ended, Olivia looked up at him. I knew if I didn't bring this forward, they'd bury it. I'm willing to testify if you need me. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, studying her face, his eyes calm but filled with quiet gratitude. You know this could cause you trouble, right? I know. She nodded. But sometimes, if we stay silent, we become part of the problem. He smiled, a real smile this time. Rare, warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Thank you. Olivia, you didn't just record a video. You gave the truth a chance to exist. Olivia nodded, exhaling softly. I've already backed it up to the cloud and sent a copy to the Aviation Investigation Bureau. And I emailed you the original file, unedited. Ethan accepted the phone, his voice low, steady, the voice of a man who's seen enough to know that truth doesn't need defense, only light. People think justice is something you have to scream for, but sometimes it just needs one person to stand still and another brave enough to press record. Olivia smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with relief. You know, she said, when they dragged you off the plane, everyone stayed silent. But I think, soon, they'll realize that silence comes with a price. Ethan nodded. And sometimes they're not the ones who pay it. They both turned toward the wide glass window. Outside, a SkyLumen jet prepared for takeoff, golden light spilling over its metallic skin. A beautiful, quiet moment filled with contradiction. Much like the world itself, free, bright, but never truly fair. A uniformed airport staffer passed by, recognized Ethan, and gave a subtle nod, not out of formality, but out of respect. Perhaps he had already seen the video, the one now spreading across the internet by the thousands. Indeed. Olivia's video had gone live. Hundreds of thousands of views within the first hour. Hashtags exploding across every feed. SkyLumen scandal. Justice for Ethan. Privilege on board. Olivia glanced down at her phone. Stunned. I didn't think it would spread this fast. Ethan replied softly. The truth, when it's been silenced too long, always finds its way out. He stood, offering her a grateful nod. From here on, let me handle it. You've already done your part, the hardest part. Olivia watched him walk away steady, composed, like a man who'd never been humiliated just hours before. And she realized something rare. Some people don't need to shout to be heard because their silence speaks louder than anything else. In the corridor, Ethan paused, took out his phone, and opened a new email from Olivia. Subject line, full footage, uncut SkyLumen Flight 481, Seat 2A incident. He played the first few seconds, then locked the screen. The evidence was now in his hands, and this time, the truth wouldn't be trapped inside first class. He made a call. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar Natalie Pierce, COO of Aurora Nexus. Ethan. Are you all right? I'm fine, he replied. I need a legal team in our media division. We're not suing for reputation. We're going to let them face the consequences of the system they built. Natalie was silent for a moment, then said quietly, I knew you wouldn't let anger lead you. Ethan smiled. No, Natalie, I'm not angry. I just believe the truth needs to be seen so no one ever has to go through what I just did. The call ended. Ethan kept walking. Through the growing crowd, some whispering, some pointing, recognizing him from the video. But he didn't lower his head. He didn't flinch. His calm presence cut through the noise like clarity through chaos. Behind him, Olivia watched, her heart full. She knew she had just witnessed something rare, a moment when a man refused to fight with anger because he understood. Justice had already found its voice in truth. And miles away, in a glass-walled boardroom high above the city, a crisis was already unfolding inside SkyLumen's headquarters. As the CEO replayed the viral video, he had no idea the man their crew had just forced off the plane was the very business partner SkyLumen had been desperate to secure. Less than 8 hours after the SkyLumen flight landed, a 3-minute video exploded across social media under the title "Black Man Removed from First Class Seat. You Won't Believe Why." At first, it was just another repost from a small account, but within hours, it passed 1 million views. By afternoon, 15 million. News outlets, bloggers, and human rights organizations all picked it up. Frame by frame, word by word, every detail became evidence: Logan Whitaker's cold stare, Victoria Sterling's discreet bribe, Ethan Brooks' calm voice that never once raised itself. All of it painted a portrait of how privilege twists justice, and the world stopped to watch. Hundreds of miles away, inside the SkyLumen Airlines headquarters, a 47-story glass tower in downtown Chicago, chaos reigned. On the 39th floor, Edward Sinclair, the CEO, sat in silence behind a polished mahogany desk. Before him, a paused frame from the viral video, a black man being forced out of seat 2A, escorted down the aisle. When the playback froze at the final image, Ethan's steady gaze into the camera, neither angry nor resentful, just painfully calm. Edward felt something twist inside him. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. The coffee on his desk had gone cold hours ago. Across the table, a woman's voice broke the silence, firm, low, and controlled. "Mr. Sinclair, the situation is spiraling out of control." It was Vanessa Quinn, SkyLumen's head of public relations. Her face was pale from lack of sleep, eyes locked on the news headlines flashing across the big screen behind her. SkyLumen Airlines accused of racial discrimination. Black CEO kicked out of VIP seat. Despite valid ticket. Silent justice at 30,000 feet. Vanessa swallowed hard. "We've confirmed it. The passenger in the video, Ethan Brooks, is the CEO of Aurora Nexus. Their company is currently negotiating a $50 million contract with us for the new global booking system." A few executives shot out of their seats. Wait, that Ethan Brooks. The room fell silent, heavy and thick. Edward closed his eyes. He knew Aurora Nexus wasn't just another partner, they were the strategic partner, the one holding the very technology SkyLumen needed to stay ahead. "Have we issued a public apology yet?" someone asked. Vanessa shook her head. "We tried, but Aurora Nexus hasn't responded, and their silence is making the public pay even more attention." Edward leaned back, his eyes fixed on the frozen video frame. Ethan's face stared back, calm, unwavering, almost reflective. "He doesn't need to say a word," Edward muttered. "All he has to do is let us destroy ourselves." Vanessa nodded softly. "That's the power of quiet justice. And this time, we're on the wrong side of it." Outside the boardroom, PR and legal teams were scrambling. Hundreds of angry emails flooded the company inbox from customers, advocacy groups, even employees. A major newspaper headline struck like a hammer: "When justice is forced off the plane, who still wants to fly?" SkyLumen investor calls poured in. One of SkyLumen's biggest backers froze funding. By midday, SkyLumen stock had plummeted 18%. Meanwhile, at Aurora Nexus, Natalie Pierce, COO, was in a closed-door meeting with their legal team. A formal apology from SkyLumen had just landed in her inbox along with a desperate offer to revisit the $50 million contract. Ethan read the letter silently, then folded it neatly. He turned toward the window, sunlight spilling across the skyline. "Not now," he said quietly. "I don't need an apology for myself. I need them to understand the cost of arrogance." Natalie met his eyes. "What are you going to do?" Ethan smiled, calm, deliberate. "I'll call Edward Sinclair, but not to talk about business." Back at SkyLumen HQ, notifications kept pinging on Vanessa's phone. CNN, BBC, The Washington Post. They all want a statement. "Sir." Edward didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, Ethan's still image looking right back at him, as if asking, "Where is your justice now?" "Edward, finally." Edward stood up, set up a video call. "I want to speak with him personally." "Now." Vanessa hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "Sir, I don't think we can fix this with an apology." Edward exhaled slowly. "I know. Some mistakes are small, but their consequences can define an entire generation. Outside those glass walls, the internet roared. Millions of voices debated, analyzed, reposted. One viral comment read, "He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just sat there and made the world listen." Another said, "Justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs the right person, at the right time, and seat 2A. The whole world seemed to awaken not just to a single act of discrimination, but to something deeper the moments we all stayed silent, the times we chose convenience over conscience, and the price of letting apathy take the pilot's seat. In the middle of the chaos, Edward Sinclair's phone buzzed. On the glowing screen, Ethan Brooks' Aurora Nexus. He drew a long breath. The storm had arrived, and there were only two choices left: to drown or to wake up. Vanessa Quinn's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every second, a new notification flashed: CNN, BBC, The Washington Post. On the finance dashboard, a jagged red line plunged downward. SkyLumen's stock had fallen 27% in just 48 hours. A single hashtag had taken over the internet: "Your Justice" at 3,500 feet. Across social media, famous faces from Hollywood actors to civil rights advocates spoke up. One viral tweet read, "He didn't need to shout." His silence was loud enough for the whole world to hear. But inside the glass-walled office of Aurora Nexus, amid the global storm, Ethan Brooks remained perfectly calm, as if he'd been preparing for this moment all along. Late afternoon, 22nd floor. Golden light from the setting sun filtered through the glass wall, painting tired faces in shades of amber. Across the conference screen, headlines scrolled market graphs, comment feeds, video clips, outrage. Beside Ethan sat Natalie Pierce, Aurora's COO, a woman who had stood beside him through countless deals, yet had never seen him this quiet before. "Ethan," she began, "the media wants a statement. They need to hear from you something. Anything. If you stay silent much longer, they'll start speaking for you." Ethan lifted his eyes toward the screen, watching the replay of himself being escorted off the plane. That same composed face in the chaos. "No," he said, voice low and steady. "They've heard enough. I don't need to speak to prove anything. Sometimes the world only believes when it sees for itself." Natalie sighed. "So what are you planning to do?" He turned his chair toward the window. Below, The city glowed like a living organism, traffic streaming through its veins frantic, feverish. "We don't need to fight back," he said slowly. "We need to heal the body." Natalie stayed silent for a beat. She understood he wasn't talking about SkyLumen. He was talking about the system, the invisible network of bias and privilege that had turned a legitimate black passenger into a problem simply for not bowing his head. Ethan opened a document on the table, his tone measured but clear. "From now on, we build a war room not for revenge, but to restore balance. Legal, media, and CSR need to sit at the same table." He laid out the plan, one step at a time. Media, no outrage, no personal attacks. Every message focuses on systemic responsibility. Legal authenticate and secure the video. Follow protocol. Prevent counterclaims of brand defamation. Social impact. Establish the Silent Justice Fund to support anti-bias initiatives and fund ethics training across the aviation industry. Natalie glanced at him. "You're turning a crisis into a movement." "No," Ethan said without looking up. "I just want people to remember justice isn't retaliation. It's an invitation to those willing to change." A young PR associate hesitated, then asked, "But aren't you afraid they'll see that as weakness?" Ethan looked at him calm but piercing. "Weakness is reacting just to feel powerful for a moment. Strength is waiting because you know you already are." The room fell silent. On the screen, SkyLumen's stock chart still burned red, yet everyone felt something different rising a quiet strength, born from the calm of a man who refused the easy path. That night, Ethan stayed at the office alone. The city glittered outside his window. He opened his laptop and scrolled through hundreds of messages from strangers sharing their stories of silent humiliation. One woman wrote, "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I once had to give up my first-class seat even though I paid for it. I stayed quiet. Today, I saw myself in your story." Ethan read every word slowly. His eyes reflected a quiet emotion, not pride, not satisfaction, but affirmation that his silence had meant something. He opened a blank document and typed the title, "Rebuilding the System One Seat at a Time." It wasn't a slogan, it was a promise. When Natalie walked in, she found him still there, surrounded by files and strategic maps. "You didn't sleep?" she asked. Ethan smiled, pouring another cup of coffee. "Justice needs planning too. Natalie, it can't run on emotion alone." She sat down, watching him. "You know," she said softly, "I think what people fear about you isn't your power, it's how you use it." Ethan turned toward the window. Morning light caught the warmth in his brown eyes. "Real power isn't about winning or losing," he said. "It's about who keeps their soul intact when they're disrespected." Outside, SkyLumen was unraveling. Internal leaks revealed that management had ignored repeated warnings about VIP favoritism. Public outrage grew. A leading newspaper headlined, "SkyLumen didn't just lose a partner, it lost trust. The one thing money can't buy." And when Ethan finally agreed to speak at a corporate governance summit, he said only one line: "When the system is wrong, the right person doesn't need to shout. He just has to stand firm and let it collapse on its own." The room fell silent. No applause. Just stillness, the kind reserved for truth. As the storm still raged around SkyLumen, Ethan's phone rang. The caller ID read Edward Sinclair, SkyLumen Airlines. But this time, it wasn't a call for apology. It was a call for help. And Ethan knew it was time for more than one airline. It was time for an entire culture to take off again from the beginning. The media storm hadn't slowed for a second. Inside the top-floor conference room at Aurora Nexus, Ethan Brooks placed his phone on the table. The screen glowed with a single name, Edward Sinclair, CEO, SkyLumen Airlines. For a few seconds, Ethan just looked at it, not weighing a conversation, but measuring a test of integrity. Then, he answered. Edward's voice came through, trembling beneath forced composure. Ethan, I want to express my sincerest apologies. I know what happened on that flight hurt you deeply. We're taking action against everyone involved. Please understand. Ethan interrupted, his tone, calm, steady, mechanical, like the ticking of an old clock. Mr. Sinclair, I'm not here to accept apologies, because what needs fixing isn't the people you'll discipline, but the system that allowed it to happen. Silence. A long exhale. Edward's voice dropped, nearly pleading. Then, what do you want? Ethan, name your terms, anything. Just help us stop this from destroying the company. Ethan rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the window, where the sunset spilled gold across the glass skyline. His words came quiet, but each one fell like a weight. I don't want terms, Edward. I want accountability. He turned, eyes sharp as glass. Tomorrow morning, at the emergency shareholders meeting, I want 2 things added to the agenda. Edward's breath caught. 2 things. First, Ethan said, every individual involved, Mia Cartwright, Logan Whitaker, and Captain Thomas Reeves must be terminated immediately. Not because they made mistakes, but because they chose obedience to injustice over loyalty to principle. Edward said nothing. Only the faint sound of swallowing came through the line. Ethan continued, his tone still even, but carrying the kind of authority that left no room for interruption. Second, cancel the $50 million modernization contract with Aurora Nexus. Edward froze. You want to cancel your own company's contract. Ethan, that doesn't make sense. Do you realize how many people on your board will fight you on this? Ethan smiled faintly, not arrogant, just aware. You misunderstand me, Edward. I'm not looking for advantage. I'm sending a message. He opened a folder on the table, a web of corporate ownership charts, lines connecting aviation and tech conglomerates. Do you know who owns 25% of SkyLumen shares? Edward Silence, an investment alliance, Ethan said, that Aurora Nexus happens to advise. We're not just your technology partner. We're part of your voting board. The sound of a chair creaking came through the receiver. Edward's voice, pale and stunned. My God, I had no idea. Ethan's reply came low, deliberate, like hammering nails into the coffin of arrogance. You didn't need to know. You only needed to understand that the people you dismissed as small sometimes hold the keys you think you own. On the other end, Edward's breathing turned ragged. You're trying to take everything from me, aren't you? No, Ethan said quietly. I'm helping you see what you already lost. He paused, then continued, voice soft but weighted with truth. I won't sue. I won't take you to court. But everything will happen in the open before your shareholders, before the press, before your employees. If you have any dignity left, you'll do the right thing, before I have to make you. A long silence filled the line. Then Edward's voice, almost a whisper, Is this really what you want? Ethan looked out the window as the twilight deepened to violet. No, it's not what I want, but some lessons can only be learned when you lose what you value most. The line went dead. Ethan set the phone down, exhaled deeply. A moment later, Natalie Pierce entered. She'd caught the end of the call. "You just did what no one in this industry would even dare," she said, half in awe, half in fear. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. Sometimes, to change the system, you have to make it tremble first. Natalie sat down, studying him. "You know, Ethan, maybe what makes you different isn't your power. It's that you choose not to use it for revenge." Ethan smiled faint, reflective. Revenge only turns you into a mirror of the person who wronged you. Responsibility, that's what turns you into someone they can never become. Outside, the city glowed beneath a restless sky. In the reflection of the glass, Ethan's face appeared calm, resolute, unmistakably human. The next morning, inside SkyLumen's headquarters, the entire board of directors gathered. At the front, Edward Sinclair stood at the podium, hands trembling. At the far end of the table, the screen lit up Ethan Brooks, joining via live video. And the meeting that followed would decide not just the fate of an airline, but the world's faith in justice itself. The next morning, SkyLumen Airlines headquarters felt different. There was no laughter in the halls, no smell of fresh coffee in the air, only silence, the kind of heavy silence that settles when everyone knows something monumental is about to happen. On the 39th floor, the same boardroom that had hosted million-dollar deals now sat the witnesses of their own reckoning. Every member of the board of directors was present. At the center table, Edward Sinclair, SkyLumen's CEO, sat with his head bowed, fingers interlocked, the deep lines on his forehead betraying a sleepless night. No one spoke until Edward finally broke the silence, his voice low and hoarse. "Let's begin." Across the table, Vanessa Quinn, the communications director, the only one who had kept her composure through the chaos, pressed play. The familiar images appeared on the massive screen, the first-class cabin, seat 2A, and the confrontation the whole world had already seen. But this time, it wasn't the viral clip. It was the full recording, the uncut footage captured by passenger Olivia Park. With every passing second, the room grew heavier. They saw Mia Cartwright, the head flight attendant, discreetly accepting a folded bill from Victoria Sterling. They heard Logan Whitaker's cold voice as he muttered, "Easy way or hard way, your choice." Then came Captain Thomas Reeves, walking up beside them, no questions in his eyes, only silent complicity. And finally, Ethan Brooks, standing from seat 2A, calm, composed, walking out without anger or defiance, just quiet strength. When the video ended, no one moved. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, as if time itself were counting down the seconds of justice. A man's voice cracked through the silence. Is this real?" Vanessa nodded. "Verified by airport security and passenger Olivia Park. It's the original, unedited file." Edward exhaled, weary but resolute. He stood, scanned the room, and spoke slowly. "When I first joined this company, I thought the worst disaster an airline could face was a crash. Today, I know the real crash happens when arrogance takes the controls instead of conscience." He paused, eyes dropping to the list before him, 3 names: Mia Cartwright, Logan Whitaker, Captain Thomas Reeves. "These 3," Edward said, voice breaking slightly, "are hereby terminated effective immediately. No appeals, no severance, no reinstatement. Security will escort them out of the building right after this meeting." A few board members shifted, as if to protest, but one look from Edward was enough. This wasn't a decision anymore. It was a sentence. 10 minutes later, Outside the 39th floor conference room, the three appeared. Logan walked heavily, his face flushed from anger or shame. No one could tell. Mia tried to hold her composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Captain Reeves, a man who had once flown thousands of passengers safely across continents, now walked with his head lowered, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Security escorted them to the main exit. As the revolving door spun shut behind them, dozens of employees looked on. Some whispered, some just shook their heads. An uneasy silence filled the lobby. And then, someone realized the sight of these three being escorted out today was a perfect mirror of Ethan Brooks being escorted off that plane just days earlier. History had come full circle, only this time. It was just back in the boardroom. Edward sank into his chair, rubbed his face. Vanessa spoke softly. "You did the right thing." Edward shook his head. "No, I'm just paying the price, and paying the price is the first step toward making things right." The room fell silent again. On the screen, the final image from the video still glowed, Ethan turning back toward the first-class cabin, his gaze steady, unflinching. Edward stared at that image for a long time, and, in that stillness, he finally understood the man they had branded. A disruptive passenger had instead held up a mirror to the rot within their entire system. At that same moment, in the Aurora Nexus office, Ethan received a message from Natalie Pierce. They've fired everyone involved and issued a public apology. Ethan didn't smile, didn't gloat. His eyes simply softened with quiet reflection. "Justice," he murmured, "isn't when others fall. It's when they find the courage to stand and face what they've done." Natalie nodded. "So, is it over?" Ethan looked out the window. Morning light spilling between skyscrapers. "Not yet. We've only cleaned the surface. Now we start healing the root." That afternoon, Edward Sinclair sent Ethan a short message, "I want to meet." Not to apologize, but to start again. And that moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, when the man who once caused the harm sought the one he wronged. Not to redeem himself, but to help rewrite the standard of fairness for an entire industry. 3 days after the fateful board meeting, SkyLumen Airlines headquarters fell silent once again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence before transformation. On the 40th floor, in a grand hall holding over 200 employees, Edward Sinclair stood at the podium. Before him sat familiar faces, flight attendants, engineers, supervisors, office staff. Some fidgeted, some looked down, others couldn't bring themselves to meet his eyes. Behind Edward, the SkyLumen logo glowed against the wall. But now, beneath the words "Above the Clouds," a new slogan appeared in bold light: "Integrity takes flight, because dignity is our truest set of wings." Edward drew a deep breath. He knew this moment would be etched into the company's history, not as another corporate meeting, but as a collective confession. "Today," he began, voice rough and steady, "we're not talking about profits or stocks or growth. Today, we're talking about what made all of those things collapse by us." The room fell still. I once believed that if we served well, if our customer satisfaction stayed high, then we were doing right. Edward continued. But the painful truth is, while we were proud of ourselves, we made others feel small. Heads lowered, eyes met quietly across the room as if everyone there could recall another Ethan Brooks they'd seen mistreated, and said nothing. Edward paused, then spoke with renewed clarity, each word carving through the air. Starting now, SkyLumen Airlines will ground all flights for 48 hours. Every department from pilots to cleaning crews will participate in mandatory training on bias and service ethics. Gasps rippled through the hall. Grounding flights meant millions in losses. But Edward pressed on. None of us deserve to keep flying until we relearn how to be decent human beings. 2 hours later, headlines flooded the news. SkyLumen grounds entire fleet for 48 hours in corporate culture overhaul. Many thought it was just a PR stunt until they saw who was leading the program, Aurora Nexus, Ethan Brooks's company. And that was the move that made the entire aviation industry stop and look in the mirror. The training room at SkyLumen's headquarters was redesigned to look like the inside of an airplane cabin. No stage, no podium, just rows of identical seats, no class distinction, no hierarchy. At the front stood Natalie Pierce, COO of Aurora Nexus. Instead of opening with a speech, she simply played a short video. It showed Mia Cartwright accepting money from Victoria Sterling, no background music, no effects, just breathing, nervous glances, and the sound of chairs scraping against the floor, the raw sounds of human failure. Natalie's voice was calm, almost cold. This isn't just SkyLumen's story. This is what happens anywhere people forget that fairness isn't a policy. It's a moral instinct. She scanned the room, eyes locking on faces one by one. We're not here to learn how to apologize. We're here to learn how to never need to. That afternoon, Edward Sinclair quietly joined a small group discussion with employees. A young flight attendant raised her hand, voice trembling. "Sir, if we stayed silent when we saw something wrong, does that make us complicit?" Edward thought for a long moment. Then he answered softly, "Silence isn't always a crime. But if you stayed silent to protect your privilege, then yes, you chose a side." The room went completely still. In the corner, a group of aircraft engineers, people who usually avoided corporate politics, sat wordless, perhaps realizing that justice isn't just for those in suits or PR departments, but also for those tightening the bolts that keep planes in the sky. On the second day, Ethan Brooks arrived. No media crews, no grand announcement. Just him in a simple shirt, shaking hands with everyone he passed. A few employees recognized him, the man who was removed from seat 2A. But now, no one looked at him with pity or curiosity. They stood, quietly making space for him to walk through. Ethan didn't lecture. He simply told a story. Years ago, I worked as a technician at a small airline. One day, I was asked to leave the VIP lounge because I was underdressed. They didn't know I'd just completed a project that saved the company millions. He looked around the room, voice low but resonant. I wasn't angry. I just wondered, how many times do we look at someone and decide their worth? In the first 3 seconds, then a faint smile crossed his lips. Justice isn't about making others pay. It's about helping them find the courage to change. No one spoke. Some bowed their heads. An older flight attendant quietly wiped away tears. When the training concluded, Edward stood once more before his staff. SkyLumen will never return to what it was, because the old is what made us fall. From this day on, we won't just carry passengers, we'll carry human dignity. Applause filled the hall, not loud or theatrical, but deep, deliberate, like a thank you whispered to a painful past that finally found meaning. As the lights dimmed in the hall, Edward turned to Ethan and extended his hand firmly. "I want to go further," he said. "Help me turn this incident into an opportunity not just for SkyLumen, but for the entire industry." Ethan nodded. He understood. Justice had taken flight, but its real journey was only just beginning. The 2-day flight suspension had ended. Now came the hardest part of SkyLumen Airlines' reform program, the stage everyone knew wouldn't be easy. No more public apologies. No more press statements. This was the time for reflection time to face themselves. That morning, the main hall looked different. No stage, no podium. Just small circles of chairs where everyone sat as equals, from beverage attendants to regional directors. Above them, a large message glowed on the screen. Fairness isn't a slogan, it's a consistent action. And the man who had said those words, Ethan Brooks, was now walking into the room. No expensive suit, no security, no media cameras, just a calm smile, steady eyes, and a presence that made the entire room still. Some couldn't bring themselves to look at him directly. They knew who he was, the man from seat 2A, and that made his presence even heavier. Ethan didn't begin with blame. His voice was calm, grounded, deliberate, each word chosen with care. "I'm not here to retell the past," he began. "I'm here so we can understand how a company as advanced as SkyLumen, with all its perfect systems, could still treat someone unfairly because of the color of his skin." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. "I don't want you to learn how to avoid trouble. I want you to learn how to be fair naturally." Natalie Pierce, COO of Aurora Nexus, stood beside him, guiding the first exercise. Each participant received a short scenario to act out real-life situations that could occur on a flight: a passenger complaint, a seat change, a late VIP check-in, a loyalty card verification. At first, people were defensive. One veteran flight attendant, Linda, raised her hand. "I've never discriminated against anyone," she said firmly. "I just follow procedure." Ethan smiled gently. He didn't argue. He simply asked, "And if that procedure makes someone feel small, is it still right?" Linda fell silent. Ethan stepped forward and placed a report in front of her, a summary of customer feedback from the past 2 years, dozens of anonymous complaints, mostly from Black and Asian passengers. The same pattern repeated: "wasn't trusted, had to show my card twice, felt out of place." "The people who wrote these," Ethan said softly, "weren't asking for privilege. They were asking to be seen as human." No one spoke. The silence that followed felt like a curtain being lifted, revealing a truth everyone had avoided for years. The next session was a live simulation. This time, Ethan played the passenger, the trainees, the crew. A young supervisor named Daniel was chosen. When Ethan deliberately switched seats without following procedure, Daniel immediately stepped in. "Sir, I'll need to recheck your ticket." Ethan handed over his elite card, smiling calmly. "Do you think someone like me could own this card?" The question wasn't in the script. Daniel froze. The entire room went silent. Ethan stepped closer, voice gentle. "What did you feel just now?" Daniel swallowed. "I felt challenged." Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, you felt out of control, because in that moment you were afraid of being wrong. And that fear, that's what makes people hurt others." Daniel lowered his eyes. Natalie turned to the board and wrote, "Bias isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's habit, and habits only change when we dare to look inward." Ethan opened his laptop. On the screen appeared an image of two hands, one white, one black, clasped together. Beneath it read, "Consistency is justice, fairness," Ethan said. "Doesn't come from one grand gesture. It's built from thousands of small choices every single day. When you choose not to judge a passenger for dressing simply. When you choose to listen instead of interrupt. When you ask, 'How can I help?' instead of, 'Do you belong here?'" A logistics staff member raised her hand. "But what if the passenger really is rude? How do we stay calm?" Then Ethan smiled. "Staying calm isn't weakness. It's the strength of knowing you don't need to win every moment." He paused, then added quietly, almost like a personal confession, "We don't get to choose how others treat us, but we always get to choose how we respond." Applause filled the room, not loud, but deep, the kind that comes after truth finally lands. That afternoon, Edward Sinclair stopped by the session. He stood at the back, quietly observing. When Ethan finished, Edward walked forward and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. "I think this is the first time in years my staff has learned something no manual could ever teach." Ethan smiled softly. "They didn't learn it from me, Edward. They learned it from their own mistakes. I just helped them name it." As the final session ended, Ethan packed his notes. Outside, the skies were clear again. SkyLumen planes were taking off once more, but this time, something was different. Not just in their procedures, but in the way they looked at people. And Edward knew this was only the beginning of a long journey to rebuild the trust they had once lost. In the days following the SkyLumen Airlines training program, as flights slowly resumed, the American aviation industry remained uneasy. Across social media, the phrase "Seat 2A" had become a metaphor used to describe any act of favoritism, arrogance, or abuse of power. "Don't become a Seat 2A," read one viral tweet, shared millions of times, part mockery, part moral reminder. And amid that storm, four people, Logan Whitaker, Mia Cartwright, Captain Thomas Reeves, and Victoria Sterling, were each living through the hardest chapter of their lives. Once respected for his discipline and authority, Logan Whitaker, former first-class supervisor, now sat across interview tables facing the same cold expression every time. "We've seen the video," the HR manager said flatly. "Do you really believe you'd fit in with our multicultural team?" The question sounded polite, but Logan knew what it meant: rejection. He left the office, stepping into the chill of the evening, watching another airline's logo glow across the street. Once, he'd taken pride in maintaining order. Now, he realized he had simply feared losing power so much that he forgot to see the person standing before him. That night, in his small suburban apartment, Logan turned on the TV just in time to see Ethan Brooks speaking in an interview. "We don't need to destroy people to rebuild a system," Ethan said, "but everyone must pay the price for the part they played in what went wrong." Logan switched off the TV. He sat there for a long time, not angry, not bitter, just ashamed. For the first time in years, his silence wasn't pride, it was remorse. Mia Cartwright, once the model of professional grace, that perfect airline smile, now worked part-time at a small cafe near the airport. Every morning, she poured coffee for strangers, still wearing that same practiced smile. But no one smiled back. Her face had been all over the internet, and every time a customer recognized her, she heard the same hushed whisper, "That's her, the flight attendant from SkyLumen." She had told herself she was just following procedure, just prioritizing VIPs, just doing what every airline does. But when she rewatched the video that moment, she returned Ethan's card with a forced nod. She finally saw what others saw, the quiet cruelty of someone convinced she was right while doing wrong. That night, after closing, Mia sat alone, holding her old employee badge, the corner cut off, trembling slightly in her hand. She wished that, just once. Back then, she'd had the courage to ask Ethan, "Are you okay?" But the past, like a departing flight, never turns around. Captain Thomas Reeves, once the pilot of international routes, had his license permanently revoked. No more, yes, Captain, no more cockpit lights waiting for his command. He lived quietly outside Seattle, teaching flight simulation to young cadets. One afternoon, a student asked, "Sir, have you ever had to choose between what's right and what's easy?" Thomas froze. He knew the student wasn't asking about flying, but about morality. He looked at his reflection in the simulator screen and answered softly, "Yes, and I chose the easy way. I wish I had chosen right." The class fell silent. In that young man's eyes, Thomas saw the one thing he had lost the respect given to someone who stands tall when it's hardest. Victoria Sterling, once the glamorous regular VIP who walked red carpets in designer dresses, now found herself grounded for life by SkyLumen, suspended from her investment firm, and labeled by the press with the bitter nickname, the airline Karen. She tried to fight back, insisting. It was blown out of proportion, but the more she spoke, the colder the world became. Brands dropped her. Friends distanced themselves. A former acquaintance texted her one night, "Vic, sometimes power doesn't make us bigger, it just shows how small we really are." Victoria didn't reply. She deleted the message, then replayed the video. The scene where she slipped that bill into Mia's hand played in slow motion, cruelly clear, her own face composed, proud. Cold stared back at her. Now, there was no audience, no privilege, just a woman confronting herself and realizing that real downfall isn't when others bring you down, but when you no longer recognize who you've become. Each of them paid a price in a different way, but they all shared one truth. Justice hadn't come through revenge or humiliation. It came quietly, through the natural weight of consequence. No one was publicly shamed. No one was called out by Ethan. He never asked for them to be canceled. He simply let the world see, and the world decided. A month later, when the storm had seemingly passed, Ethan received a handwritten letter. No return address, no name, just a few simple lines. "I was the one who made you leave seat 2A. Now I understand you were never the one removed from your seat. I was the one who fell from my seat of morality." Ethan folded the letter and placed it in his drawer. He didn't need to know who wrote it, because to him, justice wasn't when others bowed to apologize, but when they finally saw themselves in the mirror of their own mistakes. By the following spring, the skies over America seemed bluer than usual. Not because of the weather, but because SkyLumen Airlines had returned to the skies. This time, not with the pride of a leading carrier, but with the humility of one who had fallen and learned to stand again. After the moral crisis that once shook the entire aviation industry, the Seat 2A incident that became a worldwide symbol of injustice, many believed SkyLumen would never recover. But under the leadership of Edward Sinclair and the guidance of Ethan Brooks, the airline didn't just survive, it transformed. It became a model for what it means to rise from one's own mistakes. Within the first month of the company's reform, Edward launched a new code of ethics, simple in name, but powerful in meaning. The Fair Flight Policy. It contained only 3 core principles, but they were enough to rewrite the culture of an entire company. 1. Zero tolerance. No exceptions, no form of discrimination tolerated, ever. No more special treatment for regulars, no more status-based privilege. Whether first class or economy, every complaint about unfair treatment would be investigated transparently and made public. 2. Clear seat dispute protocol. Any seat reassignment required digital, mutual confirmation through the airline system. No more verbal orders. Every seat, every ticket, every decision documented and traceable. 3. No gifts, no favors. From flight attendants to airport managers, anyone caught accepting money or gifts in exchange for special treatment would face immediate termination, regardless of rank or seniority. Edward didn't announce this policy from a stage or in a press conference. He sent it in an internal email accompanied by a single line, "Fairness doesn't need to be declared. It needs to be practiced every day, in every seat." What stunned the world wasn't the promise, it was the follow-through. Ethan Brooks and his Aurora Nexus team built a transparent feedback system. Passengers could rate not just the service, but how respected they felt directly through the SkyLumen app after every flight. Within months, the numbers spoke louder than any headline. Satisfaction rates among Black and Asian passengers rose by 47% in just 3 months. Many travelers who once vowed to never fly SkyLumen again began sharing new posts with the hashtag #SecondChanceFlight. One elderly African-American woman wrote for the first time in years, "I didn't feel looked at differently because of my hair. The flight attendant called me ma'am, not honey. That's when I knew they've truly changed." Her words spread across the internet and something remarkable happened. Trust returned. Inside SkyLumen's headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Instead of sterile slogans, the hallways were lined with quotes from real passengers, printed over images of planes gliding through sunrise skies. One of them, displayed in the main lobby, was a line from Ethan himself. "We can't erase bias entirely, but we can build systems where it no longer survives. Every morning." Edward stopped in front of that wall. To him, it wasn't decoration, it was direction. He once told Natalie Pierce in a private meeting, "I used to think the most valuable assets of an airline were its planes. Now I know it's how people treat each other inside them." Natalie smiled. "When ethics become strategy," she said, "a company never loses its way." A quarter later, SkyLumen's stock climbed 32%, not just from profit recovery, but because investors now believed in something rarer, ethical sustainability. On board, passengers noticed subtle but powerful changes. Attendants greeted them with genuine eye contact, not robotic lines. Disabled passengers received help before asking. And, in first class, one particular seat, Seat 2A, had been preserved. Beneath it, engraved in silver letters, were the words, "Let fairness take this seat first." No one spoke of it aloud, but everyone understood it was a silent promise that the past wouldn't be erased, only transformed. The story of SkyLumen spread far beyond aviation. Corporations across industries began adopting their fair flight model. The Wall Street Journal called it a cultural revolution in corporate ethics, all born from one seat. In his final interview of the year, a reporter asked Ethan, "Do you feel satisfied seeing the people who once humiliated you forced to bow their heads?" Ethan smiled gently. "I never wanted them to bow. I just wanted them to lift their heads and still see decency staring back." as the evening news showed SkyLumen launching its new Aurora route. Edward turned to Ethan with a half-smile. "You know," he said, "maybe sometimes God lets us fall, just to teach us how to fly again the right way." Ethan looked out the window, sunlight glinting off the silver wing of the plane. "And this time," he said softly, "we're not flying to prove we're above anyone, but to prove the human heart can still rise higher than prejudice." That summer, as SkyLumen Airlines flights settled back into the skies, a quiet yet meaningful event took place at the Aurora Nexus Foundation, the charity founded by Ethan Brooks. No cameras, no red carpet, no grand speeches, just a softly lit room, chairs arranged in a circle, and a whiteboard with chalk writing that read "Second Chance Initiative Learning to Stand After What Went Wrong." It was Ethan's newest project, a program he called a bridge between regret and action. He believed that real justice didn't end when the guilty were punished. It began when they found the courage to face themselves. The first day felt heavy, cautious, uncertain. Among the 20 or so participants, 3 faces drew everyone's silent attention: Logan Whitaker, Mia Cartwright, and Captain Thomas Reeves. No one introduced them. They didn't need to. Everyone knew the 3 names tied forever to seat 2A. Logan entered, first shoulders bent, eyes hard but weary. He had lost his job, his reputation, and nearly himself. Mia followed quietly, avoiding eye contact, her hair shorter, her face thinner, and Captain Reeves, once a commanding presence in the cockpit, now sat still, hands clasped, holding on to the last fragments of dignity. Ethan stood before them, not as a lecturer, not as a judge. He simply said, "I didn't invite you here to apologize to me. I invited you here to begin again with yourselves." No one spoke, only the hum of the air conditioner and sunlight flickering across the old wooden floor. Each participant received a small mirror. Ethan asked them to look into it for 2 full minutes, silently, then write down 3 things they saw within themselves that made them ashamed. Not physical traits, inner ones. Logan finished first. On his paper were 3 words: "I liked power." Mia's hand trembled as she wrote, "I'm afraid of being disliked." Captain Reeves took the longest. He started, stopped, then finally wrote, "I stayed silent when I should have spoken." Ethan walked around the circle, reading each slip of paper. No judgment, just a nod. Then he said, "Good. Keep these with you. Don't burn them. Don't tear them. Whenever you feel like justifying your actions, read them again." No one replied. But in that silence, something small shifted. The first spark of change had begun. For the next session, Ethan brought in Dr. Harlow, a psychologist who had worked in federal justice reform programs. He started with a simple question: "How many of you believe you're fair people?" Almost every hand went up until Harlow played a video simulation. It showed volunteers serving customers in a mock scenario, and almost every one, without realizing it, served the white customers first. Dr. Harlow turned back to the room, his voice calm but heavy. "That's unconscious bias, the thing no one wants to admit. But everyone carries. It doesn't disappear through apologies. It fades only when you act against your old reflexes, over and over, until new ones form." Logan sat upright, frowning, something shifting behind his eyes, a truth he'd denied for years. Mia looked at Ethan for the first time, her eyes filled with sorrow, but also with a plea for a genuine chance to start over. Ethan divided them into small groups, Each group acted out real scenarios: a coworker discriminating against a customer, a boss ordering silence over wrongdoing, or admitting one's own mistake in front of others. When it was Captain Reeves's turn, his group reenacted a scene where a crew member tried to force a passenger from their seat. This time, Reeves stood tall, voice firm and commanding. "No one leaves this seat until I confirm it with the airline. This passenger has rights." When the scene ended, the room was still, then applause broke out, slow and sincere. Reeves didn't say a word, but a small smile crossed his face, the first since the program began. After class, he walked up to Ethan and shook his hand tightly. "You know," he said, voice rough, "I lost my license, but today I feel like I can finally pilot something again, my own conscience." The program ended with a pledge each participant had to choose one concrete act to make amends for their past. Mia chose to teach fair service ethics at flight attendant training centers. Logan volunteered with a nonprofit helping Black youth enter aviation careers. Captain Reeves offered to mentor local airlines on ethical crisis management. Ethan listened to each of them, nodding, and said only, "That's what true justice looks like when those who were wrong choose their own way to do what's right." A year later, the Second Chance Initiative was recognized by the American Transport Alliance ATA as a leading model for ethical rehabilitation. Hundreds joined from across industries: aviation, finance, healthcare, people once condemned by public opinion, now facing their mistakes head-on, learning and transforming. Ethan never once mentioned his own story in any session. When asked why, he said, "I don't want them to remember how I was humiliated. I want them to remember that I chose not to let that humiliation define me." At the Foundation's year-end ceremony, Edward Sinclair sat in the front row, watching the very people who once caused a crisis now stand on stage with humble, grateful eyes. He leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "You didn't just save an airline, Ethan. You saved the souls that were fallen with it." Ethan smiled, gaze distant, voice calm. "No one falls forever, Edward. All it takes is one hand reaching out at the right moment." It was an early autumn morning. The sky looked freshly washed, the sunlight glinting across the glass and steel of the SkyLumen headquarters. Inside, a quiet ceremony was taking place, the final signing between SkyLumen Airlines and the Aurora Nexus Foundation. It wasn't just a business deal, it was the completion of a long journey, a rebirth not only for a company, but for an idea that justice and human dignity can coexist. A few floors above the lobby, in a glass-walled room on the 42nd floor, two men sat across from each other, Ethan Brooks and Edward Sinclair. Between them, there were no more walls of hierarchy, no more remnants of resentment, only understanding. Edward spoke first, his voice low, measured. "You know, Ethan, when everything first happened, I thought you'd destroy this company, but you didn't. Now I understand your idea of justice wasn't revenge, it was rebirth." Ethan smiled faintly. Light from the window caught his face, turning his eyes to liquid glass. "If justice is only punishment," he said softly, "it closes every door. But if it's awakening, it opens a path for all of us to move forward together." In the stillness, the two men stood and shook hands. That handshake was more than agreement. It was the meeting point of two worlds that once collided, one representing privilege, the other its victim. Now, both stood as architects of something new. A year after the Seat 2A incident, the independent audit was released. International ethics boards confirmed that SkyLumen Airlines had achieved the Ethical Excellence Standard, the highest certification for moral integrity in commercial aviation. But beyond the certificates, the numbers told the real story. Discrimination-related complaints down 93%, minority passenger satisfaction at record highs, and most powerfully, 82% of employees said they now felt proud to work in a place that treats people fairly. No one had told them to say it. They felt it in how colleagues looked at one another, in small daily decisions once dismissed as not worth noticing. Ethan rarely appeared in public, but that day he joined Edward on stage at the National Corporate Ethics Conference. No dramatic music, no elaborate video montage, just 2 microphones, 2 men, and one real story, the story that began in a first-class seat labeled 2A. Ethan spoke first slowly, clearly his voice steady and warm, reaching everyone who'd ever been unseen. The day I was asked to leave Seat 2A, I had 2 choices: to react like a victim or to act like a builder. I chose the second because I believe justice doesn't live in courts or on social media. It lives in how we treat people when we have the power to choose. The hall fell silent. Some wiped their eyes, not from pity, but from recognition, because in his words, they saw their own quiet moments of complicity, the times they called indifference normal. Edward nodded beside him. SkyLumen once stood as a symbol of failure, but through intelligent justice, we've become a symbol of change. Justice doesn't destroy people. It destroys the arrogance that blinds them. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was rhythmic, steady, like the heartbeat of those who had just witnessed a new kind of leadership. A month later, at Atlanta International Airport, passengers boarded a new SkyLumen route, the Aurora line, named after Ethan's company. Inside the first-class cabin, Seat 2A remained untouched, a quiet monument. On its silver backrest, engraved words gleamed softly. Justice isn't only punishment, it's the path to progress. An elderly white passenger leaned closer, reading it aloud, then asked a young flight attendant who came up with that quote. She smiled gently. "Mr. Ethan Brooks, sir. But here at SkyLumen, we believe it belongs to everyone." The man nodded, smiling, and fell silent. Behind him, a young black boy sat beside his mother, pointing at the silver engraving. "Mom," he whispered, "what does justice mean?" The mother held his hand and replied, "It means everyone has their own seat. Honey, and no one can take it away just because they think they deserve it more." The plane rumbled softly, then lifted into the air. Sunlight streamed through the window, glimmering across the silver words like dawn after a long night. That evening, in his quiet office at the Aurora Nexus Foundation, Ethan sat alone, rewatching the conference footage. The desk lamp cast a soft glow across his face, peaceful, but deep with thought. In the corner stood a framed photo Ethan from that day long ago, in first class, holding his ticket, facing 3 people who once embodied a broken system. He looked at the picture for a long time, then smiled faintly. "Justice can fly now," he whispered. Outside the window, a SkyLumen jet ascended into the night, its tail painted with the airline's new emblem, Fair Flight, True Dignity. Golden light from its wings reflected onto Ethan's face, merging everything light, justice, and the enduring belief that no matter how far we fall, humanity can always learn to rise again, if only we dare to relearn how to be human. In a world deafened by noise, outrage, and bias, silent justice is not the silence of weakness but the voice of wisdom and grace. And perhaps those once forced from their seats are the very ones who help the world finally learn how to sit right where they belong with humility and with hope. The story of Ethan Brooks, the black CEO who was forced out of his first-class seat simply because of the color of his skin, isn't just a tragedy about prejudice. It's a mirror, reflecting how each of us chooses to face injustice. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't fight back with anger. He chose silence and wisdom, letting the truth speak for itself. And in the end, the very system that humiliated him was the one that had to bow and change. From his story, we learn this. True dignity doesn't lie in where you sit, it lies in how you rise. When you're disrespected, you have every right to be angry, but only those who master that anger can bring justice the right way. Like Ethan, he didn't seek destruction. He sought transformation. He didn't fight to win. He fought to make the world better, because justice, at its core, isn't revenge. It's the journey that helps people see what's right and choose to live by it. If you still believe there's room in this world for kindness, wisdom, and humanity, then join us in sharing this story. Hit like, share the video, and subscribe to stay with us as we continue telling stories of silent justice where people don't need to shout to be heard. They simply live right and let the truth speak on its own. Thank you for watching, because your attention, your compassion, is already part of that journey toward justice.